Welcome to Living Practice, a podcast that explores sacred moments, conscious creation, and living well. I'm your host, Ricky Horvatic, and if you take anything away from today's episode, I hope it's the inspiration to go make something today. It has been a while since I've been able to record anything for you guys. I actually looked, and my last episode, at least in regards to the Tarot Diaries, came out on January 21st. I apologize for this small break, but it was ultimately necessary due to 2 bouts of illness and spring break and just a lot of stuff going on at home. I also wanted to take a step back to reflect on what exactly I want this podcast to be, because while I'm currently working through a very long-term project of getting to know the tarot on a more intimate level, the tarot is not the main focus of this podcast. It's actually the idea of creativity and spirituality and how those two ideas interweave together in our daily lives and help us feel more human. And that has been a huge part of my journey as an artist, as a spiritual person, and as a mom. And so that is what I would like to talk about. But right now I am doing so through the scope of tarot cards. And so it really took some time with me reflecting on how I wanted to show up here and what I wanted this to be. I wanted there to be more flexibility so that I could pop in and record episodes when I have time or when I feel inspired to, or when a message comes through that feels important and feels like it has to be shared, because I want this to be more of a dialogue where I can put something out there and you guys can respond either on Substack or sending me an email at starmothpress@gmail.com. I'm also on all the social medias, most of them anyways, and I try to check in there regularly. As for housekeeping, probably the main announcement that I have is my poetry book. It's a small chapbook titled Grace in Every Moment. It is now available in both ebook and physical form. You can I can put it in the show notes. There will be a link a direct link to Ingram Spark where you can purchase it. You can also search my name or the title at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and any of the other major online retailers for books. It is a print-on-demand book, and so at the present moment, I don't have any copies in my Ko-Fi shop, but I will be listing copies for sale that will be signed after I am able to order a small collection of them. I am tabling my first event as an author in May, and so I am trying to prepare some zines and get some copies of my book to have so that I can sell those at that event. Of course, if you own a local bookshop or you know someone who does and you want to put in a good word for the book to be stocked at that store, I would be ever so grateful, because I do want to encourage people to go shop at independent bookstores. And I know that shopping at indie bookstores has been one of my more favorite ways to go about supporting local businesses. I love a good bookstore. And ultimately, I hope that you guys feel inspired by this collection of work that I put together. Similar to other zines that I've put out, they're mostly contemplative poems in regards to the environment that I live in, specifically my small town and specifically the route that I walk day after day, and basically being in conversation with that landscape and getting to know it and opening my heart to it, even though I think I may have shared here before that I grew up in a town like this, and when I was a kid, I hated it. I thought it was boring and nothing interesting ever happened. And so I am trying to greet this living in a town similar to that. I'm trying to greet it with more curiosity and excitement, and it has actually led to some pretty fruitful experiences. And then just one final note before we dive into the meat of the episode is if you happen to pick up my book and feel so inclined to give it a review, an honest review, I would be very grateful. It is my first published work. It is something that I self-published. I worked incredibly hard on it, and I even designed it myself. And so please be kind, but also, please be truthful. I'm looking to grow as an author, as a designer, as somebody who puts published works out into the world, and your feedback means a lot. And speaking of feedback, if you feel inclined to rate and review this podcast or send this episode to a friend so that they can feel connected over the topics we discussed, I would be grateful for that as well. Now let's get on to the rest of the episode. Because of the pause that I took in recording, we actually have 6 cards that we're covering today. These are from the last 6 installments of the Tarot Diaries, and they include the Two of Pentacles, Death, the Ten of Cups, Wheel of Fortune, Six of Swords, and the Four of Cups. Obviously, my journey with the Two of Pentacles started where we left off back in January, and this is still a time when, the winter weather is still being unpredictable. Obviously, we had an unseasonably warm winter here in the Midwest, and I'm sure in other areas as well. But I was still struggling because of the feeling that I needed to be doing things, and the feeling like I'm never doing enough, and the feeling like nothing matters. Like there's always this complex storm of emotions that keep me in a state of, I wouldn't say just depression, it's more like a state of freeze where I can't take any forward motion. I can't decide to rest. I can't really do anything except dwell on all of the things that I perceive are wrong, both in my direct reality and the reality of the world. The fact of the matter is that I'm, like many millennials, grew up being incredibly hard on myself, and it begs to be said that I really didn't ever give myself a chance to succeed before my inner critic steps in and berates myself. And this is a pattern that goes back all the way to childhood and trying to prove and feel as though I am worthy of love because I never quite felt like love was something that was a given. It felt like it was something that had to be earned, and it had to be earned through me performing well, specifically in an academic setting. But as I've gotten older, it has kind of grown out into other areas of my life. Just a side note, I'm recording this on my porch, and I'm not sure if the microphone will pick it up, but some birds have decided to join me like right by the door under the awning of the porch. And that's just one of the gifts of living out here in the country. So the Two of Pentacles invited me into a softness that I'm not entirely used to, excuse me. And at times, my inner critic had me feeling as though I was not being useful. And so, therefore, the softness and the rest that I was giving myself was actually a waste. And luckily, I've come far enough in my journey to know that that voice is not something I should be listening to. I invite it to a conversation, and I can make sure that the inner critic feels heard so that I'm not trying to repress that side of myself, but ultimately anything that keeps me stuck in a whirlwind of emotions so that I can barely handle the day to day tasks of my life is something that is not being of greater service to me, and it is not allowing me to be of service to the people that I love. That takes us straight into the death card, which came about the time of Imbolc, I want to say. And at that time, we were getting some warm days, but they were still like only sprinkled in. And it was kind of this pendulum swinging back and forth with my mood and with the weather, between renewal and then, we'd go back into another cold day and it would feel like, oh, this winter's just dragging on. Mind you, at this point, it's still only January, maybe February at that point. So, I mean, it's not like it should have been super warm, anyways. Imbolc is known for the time when spring just starts to show herself. So, I think that it's just easy to get caught up in the emotions and allow the anticipation of waiting to take over our moods instead of appreciating what is right in front of us. And so, one of the themes that comes up as I write about these cards is my resilience, and specifically with my emotions, being able to sit with my emotions, not trying to run away from them, not allowing them to completely take over my state of being, but just being with my emotions, receiving the message, understanding that they're information, and then still being able to move forward from there, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the emotion is truth. And I will say that the resilience has been building, and there's situations that a few years ago would have completely had me in bed for weeks. And I've been able to handle them with a lot more stride, and it's made me really proud of the strength I can feel myself cultivating. It's also pushed me into trying new things and doing new things, which, just contributes overall to my mental well being. And so it's once the ball gets rolling, it can kind of snowball into a greater effect where I'm doing things that are positive for myself because I'm feeling positive, because I'm handling things in my life in a more resilient way. And I see that as a huge rebirth in my life. And that's where the death card comes in, because even though, I'm shedding these old layers and I'm letting go and I'm composting, I'm allowing this newer version of myself to come through, this person that I've been working towards and practicing being, so that I can show up more fully to my own life. And then we get to the Ten of Cups, which is traditionally shown as this cup of abundance and gratitude and complete cycles. And I think that it was came about at the perfect time, because I was walking around, and even though I was still struggling a little bit, I was seeing the brighter side of things. But more than that, I also was stepping into this mindset of surrender. And I've talked about surrender a lot, and I logically know what surrender is, but there's a big difference between knowing and actually doing it and feeling the release. And I feel like I actually was able to let go of my expectations, because ultimately, I think when we talk about surrender, it's the expectations of what we think things should be like that causes us to feel like we're suffering. It causes the anxiety or the depression. Like, I'm sitting there in February and the days aren't warm yet, even though logically I know that they shouldn't really be warm yet. And I am longing for a time that's not here yet, because the seasons haven't cycled all the way through. And I'm causing myself a lot of strife, when in reality, I could just accept, like, okay, this is the time where I'm resting and I'm spending time with family. I'm cooking soup and I'm reading books and I'm knitting or crocheting. So just surrendering to what's right in front of me instead of grasping for what I think things need to look like. And I feel like that message and that way of being really clicked into gear for me once we got past Imbolc and I was walking with the Ten of Cups. The next card is the Wheel of Fortune, and this brings us into the period of time right after my daughter's birthday, because I think that was at the beginning of March. And by this point, I'm actually getting sick. I think it was right after I threw her birthday party, I got sick, and her birthday is March 6th. So I am dealing with the stress leading up to the party of getting everything in order and making sure that everything is in place for what we need it to be. And then after the party, which is like this big build of energy, finally release. And then we have the party and everything's all done. And I'm exhausted and I'm tired, but everybody's happy. Then I wake up and I'm sick. And it's easy to look at the Wheel of Fortune card and be like, ugh, isn't that just what happens? That, I go through all of this and I'm ready for a time, ready for some me time. I'm ready for things to be less stressful for right now. And then, I wake up sick, and it can be easy to resent the flow of time. And that's probably the headspace I was in for quite a while, honestly, because there's all the stuff that I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to be recording podcast episodes, I wanted to be writing, and I wanted to be making art, and I wanted to be taking my kids to do fun things instead of laying around feeling miserable. But ultimately, I needed to rest. I needed to accept that the Wheel of Fortune and time itself is constantly in motion and is a cycle. And when I can step into this idea of, again, surrender, that's really the theme, of all the cards, but mostly these last three or four cards. If I can step into this idea of surrender and really let go of what I feel like I should be doing and not should myself to death, um, I think that I can start to lean more into the flow of what's actually happening. I think it's the Tao Te Ching that has the line, I don't know the direct quote, but it's be like water, where you don't necessarily, you're not trying to force anything. You're going with the flow of what's naturally happening. And that may be a misquote. I apologize if it is. You can feel free to email me and correct me. Um, and then we lead into the Six of Swords, and this one felt, the imagery on it, I believe this is where I made the connection with the Six of Swords. It's the people on the boat, and the swords are there in the boat with them, and they're paddling in water. And even though there's waves at the bottom, the water still looks relatively calm where they're headed, and there is land moving forward. And I compared this card to sailing through the waters of my own mind, because ultimately, the way I'm looking at the tarot and the way I'm looking at these cards and interacting with them is working through my own inner landscape as I navigate the external world. And what I can see is that when I allow myself to let go of the things that aren't necessary, and when I release the narratives of what I think things need to be like, I can leave behind old programming and I can move into a sense of fulfillment. And the fulfillment is key here, because when I'm able to feel fulfilled, it allows me to move into a state where service to others, to loved ones, to community members, to other people around me, that feels more natural because of the fact that I feel fulfilled already. It's kind of like that saying that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that is the lesson that I learned from the Six of Swords. And finally, we have the Four of Cups, and the imagery in this card feels really iconic, specifically as somebody who used to be an addict or used to be in active addiction, because it feels like kind of a selfish card, at least at first glance. You see somebody who has abundance around them, and even the universe holding out more abundance to them, and they're so focused on what they don't have, that they're not being gracious and accepting the gifts that they do. This is something that feels very coded for recovery. Anybody who has gone through recovery knows that, especially when you look back, it's easy to look back and recognize where we maybe have taken other people for granted or taken the privilege that we have for granted, or that we haven't even acknowledged the privilege that we have. And we've allowed other people to take care of us, and we haven't been good neighbors to those around us. And I think a lot of that comes from not acknowledging the good things we have in our life, because usually addiction stems from some sort of longing for something. For me specifically, it stemmed from a longing for a deeper connection, both on a human level, but also spiritually, because I didn't grow up Christian. I didn't have the kind of rich spiritual life that I know some people have grown up with. And I had a hard time understanding that that's what I was really looking for. But also, the connections that you make when you're drinking yourself to a blackout state every night is really, they're really not the strong connections that are, they're not the people that are going to show up with you and sit with you in the really vulnerable moments. They're not the people that will stick around. That's not their fault. They're dealing with their own stuff, and you're connecting over something that is, I'm not, shallow is not the right word, but you're connecting over something that is helping to dampen the true vulnerability, and instead encourages you to act only at surface level. It's hard to explain. I didn't really plan to talk about alcohol today. If you guys want me to talk more about recovery and how I got sober, I've been sober going on 9 years. I'd be happy to do an episode about that. Because it's a pretty dominant factor in my life. And actually, last night I had my first relapse dream in quite a while, and so it feels interesting that looking at this, it reminds me. I'm looking at this card again after writing about it last week, and now I'm thinking specifically of addiction, like the way that me specifically in my journey, it was more about being spoiled and not wanting to take responsibility and not being grateful for what I had. And sometimes I think that it's when we are in process, because people ultimately always are in process. We are a constant, ever evolving, ever changing ecosystem of ourselves. And it's when we are in process that we can really see the benefits of certain practices. Whereas sometimes when we reflect back on them and we're not in the middle of them, it's hard to remember that. Like, I always have a hard time going and sitting at my altar when I have like a whole list of things that I feel like I have to do or I want to do as far as like my devotional practice is concerned. But when I'm in the midst of it, I find that I want to do the thing. Like, it's exciting for me to chant the mantra or to sit in meditation or to, read the book, whatever practice it is. All of a sudden, I'm into it because I'm in the middle of it. And it's interesting because it happened while I was recording this episode, that all of a sudden these new insights from these cards are coming forth after I wrote essays about them and I tucked them away as being finished because I had already done the essays for them, and we would just recap in the episode of the podcast. But instead, I'm finding these new things come to light because I'm interacting with them again, and I'm allowing the process to kind of move me along with it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how it feels. And it also, what I have written here for the Four of Cups is, it reminded me of how practices help to sustain us and take in the beauty of our lives, no matter the state of things. So I think that that just comes down to, again, surrender, but also gratitude. And that sounds like a really huge oversimplification, but I mean, really, if we're not grateful for what we have, then why do we think we need more things in our lives? I'm not talking material things. I'm just in general, why are we dreaming? If we're not grateful for the fact that we have a job and a roof over our head right now, like, why are we trying to get a bigger house, or why are we trying to get a better job? I don't think that we necessarily need to accept all circumstances at face value, because then nobody would ever be trying to reach their goals or do a job that is more aligned with their soul's calling or their vocation. But I do think that, you know, showing appreciation for the gifts that are around us, even if they're small, even if they're insignificant, even if it's not what you wanted, it can go a long way. At least it's gone a long way for me in my inner world. All right, folks, that is all I have for you today. The episode turned out longer than I planned, but we had more material to get through. If you feel called, I would love if you wanted to rate and review, hit the bell, subscribe, leave a comment, send up a smoke signal, or any type of communication saying you enjoyed the podcast, if the messages are resonating with you, if you have any questions for me, anything like that. You can also send listener mail to starmothpress@gmail.com. As always, mail club, art, and tarot readings are available in my Ko-Fi shop. I will list the link for my book below, and you can also search for it under the title Grace in Every Moment by Ricky Horvatic. And I hope that you guys head out into the world ready to live more creatively and more curiously. Have a good one, and I will see you next month.